What's up, you guys? Coming back at you with another 10 underrated commander cards list. For those of you who are new to the series, essentially what I do is I take 10 cards that are either underplayed or the play they see is rather narrow compared to their potential. I definitely think a lot of these cards are playable in many decks, and I feel if I can help people discover new cards that might fit into their decks and help them out as commander players, I definitely would enjoy doing that. So let's start it off here. The first one I have for you guys is Relic of Progenesis, the awesome sideboard card in Modern right now. Great against a whole bunch of different strategies, whether it's Storm, the Living End strategies, anything like that. Just a great all-around card, and it also doubles as card draw. Its playability in Commander is a lot more broad. You don't really put it in your deck specifically to hate on just graveyard decks. To at any point in the game basically just say you want to exile all graveyards and draw a card is awesome. But even before that, you have to take in consideration that you're able to snipe people's graveyards. Yes, they get to choose which card gets exiled. You're able to play it safe. Definitely so important when there are decks like Marina Clan Neltoth, Mimeoplasm, artifact-based decks that synergize well with the graveyard. Just a whole bunch of decks that have interactions with the graveyard, so it definitely helps if you're able to shut those down, and this is a card that can shut them down pretty efficiently, and at the very worst, it's able to draw you a card. So I've seen a lot worse one-mana artifacts being played in Commander, and it is a $3 sideboard card for Modern primarily, but it should be able to see play in decks that are lacking graveyard hate, anything like that. Number 2 is also a pretty decent sideboard card, Dampening Matrix. Activated abilities of artifacts and creatures can't be activated unless their mana abilities. Shuts down so many things. It shuts down Arcbound Ravagers in Modern, but even better, in Commander, it has a ton of potential. The only downside to a card like this is that it doesn't shut down triggered abilities, which I honestly feel are a little bit more prominent in this format. Activated abilities, though, are still pretty decent to shut down. We do have commanders that are all about the activated ability. Gave Guru of Spores, Brea, and even the newer commander option in Marcel the Pretender, who's just based all around activated abilities. Just a very good card if you want to play something like Stacks, or even like a Stasis or Static Orb, Winter Orb, things like that that just annoy so many people. It's not to the level of hate that those cards are, but it still keeps your opponents on edge. So I think it's good enough to see some more play. But I can definitely understand why it might not. It is a little weaker in comparison to those hate cards, but it's definitely a good thing whenever you can stop activated abilities. There's a ton of good activated abilities to choose from, such as cards like Isochron Scepter, things like that. Number 3 is Thada Adel Acquisitor. She has Island Walk, which is pretty good because she allows you to basically steal an artifact card from your opponent's library whenever you deal combat damage to them. You get to exile it, and until end of turn you get to play that card. Super effective and just so underplayed. There are so many different artifacts in this format to choose from. It's almost a guarantee that every single deck is going to play Soul Ring. You're probably playing someone who's just crazy if they're not playing a Soul Ring, so you're going to be able to at least steal something that's going to give you free mana, so why the hell not? And even beyond that, there are so many good artifacts that are just meant to combo off, and even if you can't play those cards, you get to at least steal them from your opponent's deck. Think of Paradox Engines, Rings of Brighthearth, things like that that are just meant to combo and help your opponent win easy. Definitely just a multi-purpose thing that you get to steal an artifact from your opponent's deck. You could use it purely to your advantage, or you could use it to their disadvantage. Overall, just a great blue creature. The next we have Dark Prophecy, a 3 black mana enchantment from M14, the only time it was ever printed, and its effect is actually pretty decent. While I wouldn't say it's on the level of Grave Pact or things like that that deter your opponents from just removing your creatures, it gives you card draw, and you also lose 1 life for each creature. So you can sort of dissuade your opponents putting this down, and even if they absolutely have to get rid of your creatures, you get to draw a card off of it. So it's a very solid black enchantment here. It resembles kind of what Kothafed does, but it's with any of your opponent's creatures rather than just yours. So this kind of works a little bit better than Kothafed, if I had to be completely honest, because it's good at sort of dissuading your opponents from dealing with you. While it's not going to completely stop them from dealing with your creatures, it's always that slight dissuasion. And next we have Chainer Dementia Master. For 3 black mana and 3 life, you get to steal a creature from your opponent's graveyard, put it into play under your control. It becomes a nightmare in addition to its other types. And it stays on the field under your control until Chainer leaves. So just a really powerful recursion type effect on a creature. And he's also awesome because he can be your commander. Very underrated mono black commander option. You don't really see him all that much. You could see more play because of the Marcel the Pretender commander option as well. You could easily just throw him into that deck, and you get the ability to then exile without the downside of having the leaving play condition that Chainer does have. Just look up Marcel the Pretender. It kind of gets around that downside of Chainer. It's just a very cool option here. And just if you love recursion, if you love graveyard based decks, or even if you just love mono black already does similar things to this, where you already have like the reanimates and the animate dead cards, things like that already bring back creatures, and having this on a creature is awesome. So pretty good. And next we have Miyajin of Night's Reach. Now all the Miyajins kind of do a similar thing. When they enter the battlefield, as long as they were cast from your hand, they get a divinity counter. And when they remove a divinity counter, they do a certain thing, but when they have that counter, they're indestructible. Once you remove them, they do something pretty epic. Night's Reach essentially forces all your opponents to discard their hands once you remove that divinity counter. Really awesome. Noteworthy that it can't be your commander option for obvious reasons, that you're not really going to cast it from your hand. But just a very good, powerful ability. In my opinion, my favorite of the Miyajins, because it empties your opponent's hands. I mean, there's others that destroy all other creatures. There's others that destroy all lands. I believe those are the white and red ones. The green one allows you to put any number of creatures from your hand onto the battlefield, which is pretty good too. This one just shuts your opponents down entirely. Just super powerful. Actually surprised that all of the Miyajins don't see more play. I mean, we see a ton of play from the Titans, we see a ton of play from the Primordials, but the Miyajins are kind of underplayed and undervalued, so it's kind of a surprise. And next we have Starstorm. You're going to play double red and X is the amount of damage you want to deal to all creatures. Having this on an instant is pretty good. Red doesn't really do a good job of dealing with a lot of creatures for the most part. There are some good cards in the format like Blasphemous Act, and we have Chaos Warp, but aside from that, there's not a ton of awesome removal in red. This, however, isn't all that great, but it does give you the option to cycle it away for 3 colorless. That's always an upside, and I always love cycling on my cards. The more cards you have with cycling means the more options you have, the more card draw you get. And Starstorm, at worst, is going to be something that you just dump a little bit more mana into than you would normally put into something like a Blasphemous Act. I mean, Blasphemous Act is a spell of its own. I mean, you're usually only going to be paying 1 red when you play that spell. So, I mean, it's very powerful, dealing 13 damage to each creature. This, however, you're going to have to invest more mana to get more out of it, but it's still worth it in my opinion. You get the cycling, and red is a color where you don't always have the best board wipe effects. And next we have Heartwood Storyteller. Now, whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, each of their opponents gets to draw a card. This is super important for something like a group hug deck. You want to make the least amount of enemies as possible, and the best way to do that is to give them free card draw. Now, this is also good at hating on the control heavy decks that are usually going to be playing a lot of instants and sorceries, non-creature spells in general, artifacts, things like that. Not really something I see a ton of in group hug decks. Usually see more of the Howling Mind type abilities, things like that. But this is also good. I mean, it speeds up the game. The more card draw you can give to everybody, the better. I mean, group hug wants to make the game more interesting, and giving people more resources is always more interesting because they get to do more things, and the game just accelerates at a rapid pace. So it's always fun. Next we have Kiora, Master of the Depths. Now, far from my most favorite Planeswalker, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Battle for Zendikar just left a bad taste in my mouth. Just the whole set, just the expectations, and, you know, looking back on it 2 years later, and just seeing how disappointing everything was. You maybe only have 2 or 3 good cards out of the whole set. The rest is just crap. The full art basic lands are never going to be worth anything. But Keya, Master of the Depths, is extremely underrated. Her plus is just pure value. You get to untap a land and a creature you control. Obvious spots for her would be something like Rune of the Hidden Realm, where he gets to tap to blink a creature. That's awesome. And you also get to untap a land too, which is pretty good in Derevi Imperial Tactician, where the whole deck just kind of works around tapping and untapping permanents. So those 2 decks are really where I feel like she should excel in. Her minus is solid. You get to look at the top 4, choose a creature or land, put it in your hand, and that's not necessarily a powerful minus, but it's something. And her alt is pretty good. It's removal. You get 3/8/8 octopuses, and whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, it fights another target creature. Having that on an emblem is just super powerful. And speaking of the whole fighting creatures thing, we have Grool Rage Beast. When Grool Rage Beast enters the battlefield, it fights another target creature. And whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, it fights another target creature your opponents control. In Grool colors, it's all about just dominance and massive creatures just overpowering your opponents. And the best way to remove creatures and deal with them is with your creatures. You don't want to have to waste spots in your deck on non-creature spells, things like that, because it kind of hinders your ability, your strategy of just bringing out gigantic creatures. And if you can have creature removal on your creatures, it's going to help you out in the long run. It's going to help your strategy, which is what you typically want to do in Grool, is just get out big creatures in general. And it's just amazing. So anyway, guys, that was my list of 10 underrated cards. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave any suggestions of your own, cards that you think are underrated. Definitely want to consider your guys' thoughts whenever I make videos. So anyway, guys, Void here, signing off. You all have a wonderful day.